Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be looking at something called mean and standard deviation and show how to work them out. Now, in biology, particularly in A-level, you're going to need to use a lot of different statistical tests when presented with data that you need to analyse. And standard deviation is one of those tests, so it's really important to know. The reason why I've put these two guys on this front cover as well, this opening slide, is just a random image I found on the internet of two blokes looking quite enthusiastic, and it's really because when I teach this to my students, they tend not to be so enthusiastic about this topic because they think that the math side of biology is quite tricky, it's quite hard, and it really isn't. So what we're going to do in this video, so the picture's a little bit more ironic than anything. What we're going to do in this video is break down how to calculate standard deviation and what it actually is, what it tells you. Let's start with the mean. So the mean, first of all, is an average value. So in a set of numbers, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the mean tells you your average of all of those values. And you work out the mean by adding all of the numbers up and dividing by how many numbers you had to start with. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 is 15. We had 5 numbers to divide it by 5. That comes out as 3, so our mean is 3. Now that's some basic maths there. But what our standard deviation tells us is the spread of data around the mean. So it tells you the spread or the range of data around that actual number that you've calculated as the mean. So let's talk about the normal distribution curve, because that wholly relates to this. Okay, let's, for example, let's put a graph in here. Now, this is a very rough sketch, but let's just take height in centimetres on the bottom, and let's just pretend we've got frequency up the side. Okay, so with data like this, you often find, if we were to just sketch a graph, something looks a bit like this. Now that is what's known as a bell-shaped curve or a normal distribution curve. So you tend to get a lot around, if we take the highest peak, so this point here is our mean value, our mean height, you see that most people fall either at the mean, the average, or quite close to it. But you have over to the left, over here, some people who are far lower than the mean, who are of low height, and then you always get exceptions. You always get people who are beyond the mean, who are a bit taller. And this is a normal distribution curve. So if we put our mean as the peak here, and let's take our height in centimetres as, we'll just pick a random number, 180. Let's say, for example, that is our average. Now, sometimes you see values shown as, so just right here, 180 plus or minus, let's say 10 centimetres. Now what that means, or what they're telling you there, is the standard deviation. 180 is your mean. The plus or minus means that the spread of data goes above and below by, and the 10 centimetres is the standard deviation, the spread of the data around that mean. So it tells that the values tend to lie between plus or minus 10 centimetres of 180. So that would come to 170, ranging all the way to 190. So that's plus or minus 10 from the 180. So our standard deviation here is 10. So if we go to 190, which let's just say is here, and draw a line. So let's put this as 190. And if we put 170 on and draw a line, then we get, and it's not the most accurate drawing, but we get this area here under the curve. These two black lines really, I mean it's not so clear on here, but they're hitting the same point. This region here that I've shaded in red under the curve represents that standard deviation, and in fact we say that that area in red covers 68% of all of our values. So we've worked out statistically that 68% of all values would lie within one lot of standard deviation. So one lot of standard deviation above and below the mean. So let's say in this example we measured 100 people's heights. We got our mean as 180 centimetres. This graph, this area in red, would say that 68% of those 100, so 68 people, would have a height between 170 and 190. So 68% of all values would lie in that range. Now, 1.96 lots of standard deviation, which often in school gets rounded to two lots of standard deviation. So that would take us to 200 and 160. So two lots of our standard deviation, we said our standard deviation in this example was 10. So two lots, so that's including the red area and the shaded blue area. That actually covers 95% of all values. Now, that's just a little bit to put this standard deviation in a context to show how it relates to this normal distribution curve. Now, some questions may very well just ask you to work out or calculate standard deviation. Some would ask you to apply this principle that I've talked about here with the area under the curve to certain questions. So what I'm going to do is show an example of both. Now, here's the formula. You're not going to be asked to remember this, but I'm going to talk through the parts. So to work out the standard deviation, we do the square root of the sum of x squared minus, and then as a separate whole entity in brackets, the sum of x divided by n, and all of that squared divided by n minus 1. And we've said x is our measured value, n is the total number of values in a sample, and this symbol here means the sum of. Now at first hand, that formula can look a little bit daunting, but let's actually work through an example and you can see it's actually quite easy. So here, we've imagined that, well let's say I've gone out and I found 10 leaves. I found 10 leaves and I've measured with a ruler their width in centimetres. So n is 10, because we said that n was the number in the sample, so n, we'll just put here, is 10. All the widths, all the values that we've measured, so there's 3, 7, 2, 6, 2, 3, 5, 4, 1, 4, this column here, where it says width, they are our x values. And what we've done at the bottom is just add them all up. So that is our sum of x, all the x values. Then we've drawn another column, and we've taken all those x values and squared them all. So you can see 3 squared is 9, 7 squared 49, etc. And again at the bottom, we've added up all those numbers in that last column. So that's our sum of x squared. Now all you have to do is substitute those numbers into the formula. It's that straightforward. So let's take the formula over on the right hand side. This first bit, sum of x squared, well, we've already worked out the sum of x squared as being 169. It's this one here. Minus, and then in the brackets, we can see in the square brackets we've just got sum of x. And we calculated sum of x in the first column. So that's 37 divided by n, which is the 10, because we have 10 samples. And we square all of that. And we divide by n minus 1, which would be 10 minus 1, which is 9. And if you work all of that through, that will come out as the square root of 3.56 recurring, which leaves you with a number of 1.89, and that is our standard deviation. So we can say that values roughly are 1.89 away from the average. So if we worked out the average width of one leaf, if we think of the spread of data around the mean, most of the values are 1.89 centimetres away. Or even if we go back to the beginning, we can say that 68% of all of those widths that we measured would be in the range of plus or minus 1.89 centimetres. So whenever you do a standard deviation calculation, my advice is to lay it out in this table format, because you can't go wrong. You just need the two sum of numbers at the bottom of both columns. Here's a final example of a question that I give my students. No, it doesn't really require very much in terms of calculation, just an understanding of the graph that I talked about earlier in the video. So let's have a look. It says, in a population of men, the systolic blood pressure, and that's pressure, blood pressure upon heart contracting. So systolic blood pressure shows normal distribution. So we're expecting something very similar to this kind of picture, the bell curve, where we have a mean in the middle and sort of extremes either side. We're told the mean is 125 millimeters of mercury. Now, blood pressure is actually measured in millimeters of mercury, but we're just interested in the number really. So the mean is 125. Standard deviation is 10. So let's just write that over here. So we've got 125 plus or minus 10. That's what we're working with. You're told the population is 1,000, so you'll have 1,000 sort of values, if you like, people sampled. And the question is asking how many of them would have a blood pressure between 115 and 135 millimeters of mercury. So if we have just here our mean, and we want to go as high as 135 and as low as 115, what hopefully you might notice is that actually this 125 to 135, that difference there is actually 10, which is the equivalent of one standard deviation. 115 to 135 is equally 10. That is one lot of standard deviation. So what the question really is asking is, what amount of the population are within plus or minus one lot of standard deviation? And as we saw in the previous slide, if we go back to this graph at the very top, one lot of standard deviation either side covers 68% of all values. So if we know that it's 68% of all values between plus or minus one lot of standard deviation, that must be 68% of the population that we questioned essentially. So 68 of 1,000 is 680, and that there is our answer. So we're not having to do any big calculation using the formula, we're just using what we know about normal distribution and standard deviation. Okay, so I hope all of that helps.